How awesome is it to be in the glory of another mid-May? I hope you're enjoying it at least a fraction to the extent that I am, because I'm having a ball, and we arrive at episode 156. Now, it didn't dawn on me since we just came off of our 150th milestone episode, but eventually did, that this episode, what does it represent? Perhaps an even bigger milestone than 150. Because what's 156? It's 52 times 3. 52 weeks in a year, 3, as in 3 years. Yeah, this is the 3-year anniversary of the Far Middle podcast. So happy birthday to the Far Middle and to your constant listenership. As fun as this has been with the journey so far, it feels to me as if we just started it a few weeks ago, not 3 years ago. Boy, looking back and thinking things over, I am so happy that we've had the chance to create this platform and tell these weekly stories and share those strings of connections together. It's given me an entirely new and enhanced perspective on a lot of things, and I thank you for that. We also just came off another Mother's Day a few days ago. So a belated happy Mother's Day, and much respect to all of you moms. Everyone's different and everyone has their own personal story, of course, but one of the things that we all share in common, one of the few things, is owing a debt of gratitude to our mothers. Now, with the 3-year anniversary, I think you need to go in one of two directions when it comes to the flow of connections for the episode itself. One road is to take a serious philosophical contemplation of what we started as and where we are now and where we're heading into the future. Sort of a look back, a look around today, and the re-energization for where we're going into the future. That's basically what we did on the 150th episode 6 weeks ago, which means we have the opportunity today to pursue the second option or path for this episode. And that path is to have a lot of fun with the episode's flow. Now, we've done that from time to time on the Far Middle over these past 3 years, but we never seem to have enough opportunity to do it more often. And that's because with the current state of the world, we can hardly keep pace on the serious themes falling within the power alley of the Far Middle. Now, it leaves precious little time for fun, and fun is fun, after all, universally loved. So we're going to go down this path for our 3rd year anniversary episode today. Oh, and it gets better because we have the fun with the episode while emphasizing a high-intensity pace of connections, because we must, and I emphasize must, pay our due respect to one of the key inspirations of the Far Middle since episode number 1, Dr. James Burke of BBC, in the science, technology, and history program Connections. Where would the Far Middle be without him? So wherever you are, Dr. Burke, thank you, from a grateful host. And oh yeah, if you don't know me, allow me to introduce myself as the host, Nick DiOlius. You can find all of our 156 episodes along with a slew of other thought-provoking free content on nickdiolius.com. And that's nickdeiuliis.com. And I'm also on X and LinkedIn and YouTube as well. You can find me there. So are you ready for a fun run through connections? Let's get rolling. And we have our sports dedication that ties to a mother in honor of Mother's Day. Our dedication goes to the mom who evened up the score of bad yet decisive decisions between the two teams who constitute perhaps sports' most epic rivalry, the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox in baseball. Baseball fans know well how in 1920, Babe Ruth was effectively sold by the Red Sox to the Yankees for $100,000 in cash, or some say the number was $125,000. Either way, that was the highest price paid in history of baseball at that point for a player, all because why? Babe Ruth wanted a new contract that would pay him $20,000 a season with the Red Sox. And that team was unwilling to double the Babe's salary from his 3-year deal with the Red Sox that would pay him $10,000 annually. So the Red Sox, they sold him to the Yankees. And Ruth, of course, went on to become the greatest player in the history of the game and made the Yankees what they became, the most recognizable franchise in pro sports. An epically bad call by the Red Sox, and a cursed call, some might say. But there was a connection of redemption for the Red Sox, which came at the expense of the Yankees, who made an equally horrendous call a few years later, to even out the score, so to speak. And it involved a mom. Now, the greatest player in Red Sox history, Ted Williams, his mom played a big role in how his career played out. So let's explore. You see, it starts with the urban legend that the Yankees almost traded another legend, Joe DiMaggio, in 1947 for Ted Williams. Now, it's been rumored and discussed, but it's never been settled for sure, but it does make certainly for a nice story. However, a lesser-known proven fact came to light in 2003 in a book about the post-Ruth and early DiMaggio years Yankees. Get this. The same Yankee scout who successfully signed DiMaggio almost signed Ted Williams, who lived in San Diego. But the Yankee scout offered a $500 bonus, and Ted Williams, his mom wanted a $1,000 signing bonus. The Yankees wouldn't pay. So the world lost the chance to see Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio as teammates over what? $500, which might be a bigger bungling than the Red Sox selling Ruth to the Yankees. So we dedicate this episode to Ted Williams' mom and her insistence and tenacity in looking after the interests of her boy, which led to a fact pattern and a history that are quite different than what might have been. I thought you'd enjoy that sports dedication, but now it's time for more fun. Joe DiMaggio just played prominent in the dedication that we covered, and besides being a great baseball player, and despite being infamous for being aloof and a bit standoffish, he was also a hopeless romantic. And the object of his affection was none other than the legend Marilyn Monroe. DiMaggio and Monroe were married in 1954, but the marriage lasted only 9 months. However, by the early 1960s, they were back in each other's lives, and even, according to gossip, reading poetry together. Now, rumors were the two planned to remarry. After her tragic death in 1962, DiMaggio claimed the body and arranged for her funeral. He had roses sent to her crypt 3 times a week for 20 years. And when DiMaggio died 37 years later in 1999, his attorney and perhaps only confidant said that the great DiMaggio's final words were, "I finally get to see Marilyn." Now, that's a romantic for you. And one of my favorite authors of all time is Ernest Hemingway, and Joe DiMaggio offers up a quick connection to Papa, as Hemingway was known, because in the Hemingway classic The Old Man and the Sea, which many of us read in high school English class, the main character, Santiago, he had great admiration for what he referenced as the great DiMaggio. And one of the more famous quotes from Santiago in The Old Man and the Sea about the great DiMaggio was, "I would like to take the great DiMaggio fishing. They say his father was a fisherman. Maybe he was as poor as we are and would understand." Awesome stuff. But back to Marilyn Monroe. After her short marriage to DiMaggio, she entered into another marriage, this time to the famous playwright Arthur Miller. In the early months of 1956, Monroe's star was rising. She developed a relationship with Arthur Miller, who was in the process of divorcing his then current wife. And Monroe was also formally changing her name from Norma Jean Mortensen to Marilyn Monroe. And she was taking a lot of criticism and heat for her association with Miller because many considered him or alleged that he was a communist sympathizer. J. Edgar Hoover himself described Monroe at the time as, quote, "now the darling of the left-wing intelligentsia, several of whom are listed as red fronters." Yeah, he was probably thinking of Arthur Miller when he said that. Monroe and Miller quickly married right after Miller's divorce to his then current wife was finalized. The local small-town Connecticut newspaper where Miller lived, which would be Roxbury at the time, it had a headline that read something I think you'll find interesting. It said, "Local resident will marry Miss Monroe of Hollywood." And then it added, "Roxbury only spot in world to greet news calmly." That's a great headline or set of headlines. The bride was 30, the groom 40. Marilyn Monroe had severe misgivings and almost refused to go through with the wedding. During the ceremony, the bride was given away by her acting teacher and guru, Lee Strasberg, who was a legend. We're going to return to Lee Strasberg in a minute, so keep that name in mind. And some days later after the ceremony, Marilyn happened to come across Miller's notebook that was lying on a table. She gave it a read and discovered that he was disappointed in her, that he feared his own creativity would be threatened by her, and that he was seriously regretting the union. Ouch. Well, that was a blow, as you might expect, from which the marriage would ultimately never recover. Things went south, and the pair separated in 1960, divorced the following year. Now, Arthur Miller is best known for our next connection, and that's the play Death of a Salesman. It first appeared on Broadway in 1949, well before his marriage to Monroe. It's a two-act tragedy set in the late 1940s Brooklyn and told through a montage of memories and dreams and arguments of Willie Loman, who's a traveling salesman and who's despondent with his life and appears to be slipping into senility. What, is that me and you that we're describing? Just kidding. Death of a Salesman, it hits on themes of the American dream and confronting truth and infidelity, all kinds of issues swirling around that play. It won all kinds of awards, including a Pulitzer Prize and a Tony, and it's considered by many to be the greatest play of the 20th century, and it might be the most successful modern play ever. Now, the play leads us to our next connection, which is legendary actor Dustin Hoffman. He played Willie Loman in the mid-1980s made-for-TV adaptation of Arthur Miller's famous play. Death of a Salesman TV version that won an Emmy. Oh, and guess who trained Dustin Hoffman in the method acting approach? None other than Lee Strasberg, the same actor and method acting guru who gave away Marilyn Monroe at her wedding to Arthur Miller. Connections within connections on our 3rd year anniversary episode. Now, John Malkovich co-starred in the TV movie version of Death of a Salesman, playing one of Loman's sons. Excellent actor, that guy. But let's jump back to Dustin Hoffman, who has a legendary and fruitful career. We've talked about him on a couple of episodes in the past. So many great roles in films that he starred in. And one great early role of Hoffman's was in the iconic 1967 film The Graduate. He was nominated for Best Actor in that one, and the film was nominated for Best Picture. And Anne Bancroft was nominated for her classic role as Best Actress. Classic song that served as the theme for that movie with Simon and Garfunkel was the hit Mrs. Robinson. What's one of the most famous lines in that song? Paul Simon penning the lyrics of "Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Our nation turns its lonely eyes to you." Again, connections within connections this episode. And another one of the best sort of lead roles for Hoffman was, of course, in Rain Man, later in his career alongside Tom Cruise. Everyone loves that movie, and so did the Academy. It won the Best Picture at the Academy Awards in 1988, and Hoffman won Best Actor, and the film won Best Director and Best Screenplay. It seemingly won everything that year. And it, of course, tells a story of that brash and self-centered Charlie Babbitt, played by Cruise, who finds out that his estranged rich father has died and decided to leave all of his multi-million-dollar estate to his other son, Raymond, played by Dustin Hoffman. Now, Ray is an autistic savant, and Charlie wasn't even aware of his existence. Charlie ends up getting in the dad's will only a vintage car and I think some rose bushes. And so begins the journey of the two brothers in the movie that becomes a loving relationship. Remember Raymond insisting on watching The People's Court every day and his travel idiosyncrasies? Again, a great film and a happy ending for sure. And we can make a connection between two of my favorite actors, Dustin Hoffman being one. And it's the type of knowledge, this connection, that you're only going to get on the far middle. It's just another example of take-home value of being a constant listener, because most people don't know that there was another famous actor who had a shot or was offered the opportunity to play that lead role in Rain Man of Raymond Babbitt. Again, the role that Dustin Hoffman won an Oscar for. Now, who was this other actor? Well, it was none other than another one of my favorites, Australian acting legend Mel Gibson. Now, there was an interview that Gibson gave to Charlie Rose. It was about, I think, over 20 years ago now at this point. And back then at the time, Gibson was at the height of his powers and popularity. He just won his own Oscar for Braveheart. Freedom, right? And he got whatever role he wanted at the time in whatever movie. But all that freedom, borrowing the Braveheart line, when everyone wants you in the lead role, it makes for some interesting and fascinating what-ifs, because you can't say yes to everything. And there are going to be ones that got away, as in iconic roles. For Gibson, when he's asked if there's any roles he wished he would have taken but ended up passing on, the first thing that came to his mind when chatting with Charlie Rose in that interview was Rain Man and the role of Raymond Babbitt. Gibson said, quote, "Geez, I remember a while back, Rain Man came, and that was kind of a cool thing." And when he was asked if he was offered the role that Dustin Hoffman ended up landing, he replied with, "I think so." Now, I could see Gibson playing that role, which is weird because Hoffman, of course, was superb in the role. Mel Gibson agreed with my assessment of Hoffman. He said, but the great thing about that is Dustin Hoffman did it, and he was wonderful in it. Boy, what might have been, just like the Babe not being, sold to the Yankees, to the Red Sox. And if that scout for the Yankees ponied up $500 more for Ted Williams and his signing bonus. Again, connections layered upon connections. Let's not be too hard on Mel, because Mel Gibson has endowed us with a rich portfolio of great movie roles over his career. There is one he played a major role in a movie that most critics sort of criticize him, smack him down for. But I thought he was strong in this role, and I love this movie. This movie is an underappreciated favorite of mine. It might be the most star-studded, packed talent of any movie that you're going to see. Now, what if I told you there was a movie out there in the 1980s, when it first came out, that starred not just Mel Gibson, but also Anthony Hopkins, and we'll throw in a Liam Neeson, and oh, what the heck, let's throw in Daniel Day-Lewis. And oh, wait, if you act now, you also get a cameo by none other than Laurence Olivier, for cripe's sake. Now, that's a movie this host would really want to see. And the good news is that you can see it and I can see it anytime we like, because the cast that I just rattled off, that is the star-studded lineup of the movie The Bounty from 1984. How does one describe The Bounty? How about this description, and try saying it 3 times in rapid succession? A British epic action-adventure, swashbuckler, historical, psychological thriller drama. Yeah, that's pretty much how I would describe it. And the movie depicts the voyage and mutiny, of course, of HMS Bounty. You got Captain Bligh and Mr. Christian on board, played by Hopkins and Gibson, respectively. The 1984 version of The Bounty is decently historically accurate, I would say. But despite the great plot and legendary cast, it was a financial flop at the box office. But who cares, constant listeners, because the movie is awesome. And I might point out what I consider to be the best part of the movie, The Bounty. It was not surprisingly just overall or generally Anthony Hopkins' performance, which was awesome. And on that observation, most film critics agree. But more specifically, what I adored about Hopkins in The Bounty was when he would berate his crew or officers. Give that movie a watch and then try to tell me that Anthony Hopkins doesn't know how to dress down an individual. When he's yelling at his crew on the screen, you feel like the guy is coming at you. God damn your hide, he would yell. Yeah, drill instructors at Parris Island in the Marine Corps should give that movie a watch before they start to mold another recruiting class of Marines. It can be inspirational for them. Anthony Hopkins is probably the most talented all-around actor, the most accomplished all-around of the star-studded lineup of The Bounty. I excluded Laurence Olivier because he played only a cameo in the movie, but let's put those two together. So you got Laurence Olivier and Anthony Hopkins, the most talented, most accomplished all-around of a star-studded lineup that you find with The Bounty. And although that's the case, neither actor, in my opinion, had the best single role in a movie, one movie, when you look at the overall impact of that movie. So if you want to sort of assign that honor, I think it would go, at least in your host's humble opinion, to Liam Neeson in his performance with Schindler's List. That movie, Schindler's List, what can be said about it that hasn't already been said? It moves you, it makes you think, it never loses its intensity. Liam Neeson is a big reason why. So you got Olivier and Hopkins as the most accomplished, most talented all around of the cast of The Bounty. And you got Liam Neeson with the most impactful, impressive single role in a single movie with his performance in Schindler's List. And then you got Gibson within that cast of The Bounty, who was the biggest box office draw and moneymaker cumulatively over a career. So you would think out of that list, my number one favorite out of the bunch, it would be somewhere in there, right? It would be, in terms of my favorite actor of all time, Olivier or Hopkins or Gibson or Neeson. But that would be incorrect, because my favorite all-time actor, at least for my era, is none other than Daniel Day-Lewis. He is, I think, the greatest actor of his generation. He's proven it time and again across a range of movies over the course of decades. What I love about this guy, he finds ways to play lead roles in movies that are just breathtaking historical statements and scenarios. Think of some of the movies he's been in. Last of the Mohicans. What a richly created cinematic thrill. There's In the Name of the Father, capturing that tension of the Troubles and Ireland and in the UK. Gangs in New York, Bill the Butcher. How memorable was that? And of course, his performance in There Will Be Blood, which serves in many ways as a classic American tragedy. And how about how he portrayed to the point of becoming Abraham Lincoln? Yeah, if I was shipwrecked on an island that had access to a DVD player or a limited digital library, and I could choose only one set of films from one actor, I would pick Daniel Day-Lewis and his catalog. It's depressing, frankly, for me to see him fully retired from making great films. We talked about him at the end of an episode way back, and I mentioned that he was reportedly using his newfound spare time in retirement to learn how to make shoes, of all things. So think about that the next time you walk past a shoe repair store. The cobbler in there might be none other than Daniel Day-Lewis. Oh, and how about another connection within a connection when it comes to Daniel Day-Lewis? Do you know who his father-in-law was? None other than the playwright that we discussed earlier, Arthur Miller, the ex-husband of Marilyn Monroe and the creator of the play Death of a Salesman, where the TV version starred Dustin Hoffman, who was the actor who ultimately led us through a string and series of connections to Daniel Day-Lewis. That's the way the far middle works, constant listener. And Daniel Day-Lewis starred in a movie adaptation of one of his father-in-law's famous plays, maybe the second most famous, right behind Death of a Salesman, that being The Crucible. Another literary work, by the way, that I was assigned in high school English class, along with Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea. Now, Miller penned The Crucible in 1953, and the play is based on the Salem witch trials in the late 1600s, held by people in a region whose descendants would ultimately become Red Sox baseball fans, the same Red Sox who sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. Miller wrote the play to criticize McCarthyism in the 1950s. That was a time when we actually viewed communism as a threat, but perhaps we went a bit too far and started to trample on individual rights and freedoms. But imagine that, looking at communism as a threat. And as we discussed, Miller was on the sympathizer list of communists or supposed or alleged communists, due in part to his criticisms of McCarthyism through his works like The Crucible. Boy, the beauty of freedom of speech abounds. Got to protect it at all costs. Incidentally, Daniel Day-Lewis and Rebecca Miller, his wife and Arthur Miller's daughter, they met at the screening of the film The Crucible and married and remain married to this day. She's a filmmaker, by the way. Gosh, I hate to have to bring this episode to an end, but it's getting time to do so. So let's end with a question. Daniel Day-Lewis is from Kensington in London. My question is, what is in the water in Kensington that creates all this acting and theatrical genius? Because Lewis isn't the only legend in theater originally from Kensington. Andrew Lloyd Webber also hails from Kensington. And you want to talk about accomplished? Everyone knows his creations. Cats, Phantom of the Opera, Evita, Jesus Christ Superstar, Joseph in the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, and my favorite, School of Rock. Now, I'm not a theater or Broadway elite, but even I have attended a few of these performances through the years. I counted them 4, actually, ranging from high school productions to Broadway and a lot in between. And amazingly, Lloyd Webber had shows continually running in the West End of London for 48 years and on Broadway for 41 years. School of Rock didn't know this. It was the first British musical to have its world premiere on Broadway. And when Lloyd Webber's Sunset Boulevard joined School of Rock, Cats, and Phantom of the Opera on Broadway, he became the only individual, in addition to the great Rodgers and Hammerstein, to have 4 shows running simultaneously on Broadway. How about that? Yeah, a legend and a fitting end for our 3rd year anniversary episode of The Far Middle. I thank you again for your investment of time these past 3 years, and we start year 4 of The Far Middle next week.